Good afternoon. Welcome to KAUST Live. We're joining you from the HPC Saudi 2017 conference. We're joined today by Dr. Robert Voigt of the Krell Institute. He's going to talk to us a little bit about his experiences, and he was here to give us a keynote lecture earlier today. Robert, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So tell us a little bit about the Krell Institute, where you're coming to us from now.
Sure. The Institute's been in existence for approximately 20 years, a little more than that. It is intended as an organization to support projects and activities of interest to particularly the Department of Energy. So its largest activity has to do with managing the Computational Graduate Fellowship Program, which I've been involved with through Krell since its beginning.
Very good. And that sort of links what you're here to talk about, which is educational programs in general for computational scientists. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So this program that I feel does an excellent job of providing education for people who are interested in computational science has several components to it. It requires the students be exposed to a certain curricula. It's not frozen. The curricula the student proposes and is reviewed in the spirit of being in line with what we think computational science is, namely exposure to an application, exposure to training in mathematics and in computer science. And an important component of the program is that the student is required to do a practicum at one of the DOE-sponsored laboratories. And that practicum is 10 weeks long, and it gives the student an opportunity to be in an environment that does multidisciplinary research using high-performance computing.
Do you have any pet examples or things that come to mind that has made this a success?
Well, the students make it a success. As an indication, we're in the midst of selecting this year's set of fellows. We have little over 450 applications, and we'll be able to select 20, so it's a very competitive program. The applications go through an extensive review, and we feel we get really good students who are interested in computational science.
Are these students selected based on particular areas of inquiry, or simply straight up as like just the top applicants, or how does that end up working?
So the application requires the students to respond to 3 essays. And then, of course, there's the usual thing you would expect in an application, reference letters and grades and that kind of thing.
Of course.
But the essays I think, really help separate the students. They have to talk about the science or engineering that they're interested in. They have to explain in what we call an elevator speech. You've got 30 seconds or a minute to tell someone who isn't a scientist what you want to do. So they have to do that, and then they have to delve a little bit deeper. And then they have to explain how high-performance computing supports and relates to their work. So that's, I think, a very interesting discriminator for the awards.
Very good. And you are a person who has a lot of experience, particularly with DOE. So I wonder what lessons can newer institutions sort of pick up from the educational programs and things that happen around the DOE?
Okay, so I think it's relatively easy to deal with what we call the program of study, the courses that the student proposes and have to meet certain criteria. I think the difficult thing for an institution like KAUST is to provide the multidisciplinary exposure to research institutions. And without that, the only potentially comparable thing that I can think of is interacting with some of your industries. For example, Aramco is clearly is doing work at a very high level, and so. And I don't know this, but I'm assuming that some KAUST students spend time at Aramco, and I think that's a very good thing to do.
Yeah. Do you think then, outside of those industry partners providing training, which they do, but do you think that there are other alternatives, or should I say, what is the avenue forward for training in a complete and multidisciplinary way these students?
So my impression of KAUST, I know some of the people here from previous interaction, is that the university is actually trying to foster multidisciplinary teams and research within the university, and of course I think that's very good. I think it's actually one of the things that is easier for a new university to do because it's not ingrained in any kind of culture as yet, whereas some of the old staid institutions in the United States find it a little more difficult to do that.
How do you, since you've been thinking about education and training for some time, how do you prepare, knowing what you know now, for what's going to come in 10 years to prepare these scientists?
So we've had training in that, so to speak. The program's been around long enough that it's seen a real change in what computational science emphasizes, and therefore the fellowship has had to adapt and change. For example, when we began, almost all of our fellows did computational fluid dynamics. There was no bioinformatics at that time, for example. Now bioinformatics, bioengineering plays an important part of the fellowship. And there are other areas like that, like data analytics, that were in their infancy when the program began, but is now an important part of the program.
So for institutions like a KAUST, but even thinking in the region, how can they take some of these learnings and try to leapfrog into whatever the next thing is?
I think any good scientist is vigilant about what is happening in their area, and typically responds in the best way they can, either by ignoring it or embracing it, right, depending on their interests. So I think an institution like KAUST, again, because it's new, does have more flexibility in anticipating and approaching new developments.
Since you've been U.S.-based for your career, do you think that there are differences in the way that education should be approached for computational scientists? Or is this a global science sort of situation?
I think it's pretty global. I think how you implement it is different. I mean, for example, Saudi Arabia doesn't have the advantage of having the incredibly valuable network of Department of Energy laboratories that provide a great training opportunity for students. So that's something that I don't see how it could be duplicated very easily. I mean, the government in Saudi could decide to initiate one or more laboratories focused on something if they so chose, but it would take time to build up the competency there as well.
Any sense personally about what you think the next big leaps in HPC are going to be in general?
I think we should pay attention to quantum computing and neuromorphic computing. Neuromorphic computing is using the basis of computer as we see them now, namely chips and VLSI and that kind of thing, to mimic the activity of the brain. So IBM has already demonstrated some work in this area, and I think that it shows great promise for doing things like machine learning, which is becoming very important for extracting information from large amounts of data. So I think that's an important area to look at, and as I said, quantum computing, which There is now at least one company that has commercially developed a small quantum computer. They are not general purpose devices, but that doesn't mean that they won't evolve into something that's general purpose.
But why does quantum computing come to mind in particular?
Well, you asked me for a couple of things that I thought.
No, but I mean, what about it do you think is in the future?
Oh, I see.
Important?
Okay. Okay, I understand now.
Yeah.
I think it offers great potential from the standpoint of very low cost in terms of power and money for a supplicant or even perhaps a replacement for high performance computing.
Oh, wow. Okay. So is this something that you would suggest students get themselves up to speed on?
Well, a great course for a student to take would be a course in quantum physics or quantum chemistry. To my knowledge, there is not a course anywhere that's offered in quantum computing as such. But the basis of quantum computing comes from quantum physics. So the more a student would know about that, the better.
Okay. So do you, in particular, do you think that in terms of education, there's been a massive change in the way that computational scientists have been educated? Is that changing rapidly? Give us a sense for that in your experience.
I don't think it's changing rapidly. There are a relatively small number of universities that offer a degree. I'm talking about U.S. universities that offer a degree in computational science. I think that's gradually changing. I think there's growing recognition that computational science is a legitimate discipline and that it merits its own degree program. But it's slow to happen, and I think part of that, again, goes back to the older, more, if you will, entrenched universities. Changes come slowly. After all, they are bureaucracies. So I think that's one thing we will see more of. I think just the spirit of taking courses that overlap in application mathematics and computer science has been around a while, and I don't think that's going to change. I think that's a basic component of computational science.
So if you were starting out as a student, what would you want to do? Is going the physics route and then coming to computing still sort of the way to do it, or?
Well, I think there's going to be growing recognition that what I would call enabling technologies in computer science are going to be important. That is, algorithms from mathematics or tools from computer science. So I think that I think we're going to see more interest from computational scientists in these as opposed to what has classically been computational science, namely a focus on an application with exposure to these other fields.
Right. Very good. Well, Robert, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time. And thank you to everyone in our Facebook audience for joining us. And have a good afternoon.